Well, first of all, thank you everybody for coming out. And the topic I'm speaking to you today on slavery, enslaved people in Cape Breton. I've been at it pretty well all of my adult life, and I have about 8 scholarly publications on this topic alone. I've published 100 peer-reviewed articles, and I have 8 books, and most of my material is online. And if you look up Ken Donovan, historian, it'll come up, Academia EDU. But today I'm going to talk to you about Marguerite Rose and the history of slavery in Cape Breton, 1659 to 1815. I'm going to concentrate on Louisbourg, but I'm also going to talk a bit about post-Louisbourg. There were enslaved people in Cape Breton after the French, after Louisbourg fell, and there were enslaved people before Louisbourg was founded. So 1659 relates to an enslaved Inuit woman who was brought to Nicolas Denis at St. Peter's in 1659, and we know this because of the baptismal records, okay? The Jesuit estates, Jesuit records. So slaves lived in pretty well all of Cape Breton, and during the French regime, from 1713 to 58, French were along the northeast and southwest coasts. This is an image of reconstructed Louisbourg. And what I've done is I've identified 400 people from 1659 to 1815. So I know who they are and where they lived, who their owners were, and how they were treated. It's taken a lifetime to identify these people. And I'm going to have a book coming out at University of Toronto. There were 277 slaves among the French, and 87% of them lived in Louisbourg. There were 104 English slaves with the British and New Englanders. Of the 277 French slaves, there were 141 males, 104 females, and 32 whose gender could not be identified. Most of the slaves in Ile Royale, about 90%, were black people, okay? Not so in Quebec, not so in Canada, where most were indigenous. Slave occupations. The majority of the slaves in Cape Breton, in Ile Royale, about 92% were domestics performing work to support the functioning of various households. They would be servants and would do everything from shoveling snow to looking after the children. Only 19 slaves, 1 fisherman, 2 cabin boys, 15 sailors, and 1 executioner worked outside of the household. There's one famous slave that we have in Louisbourg, and he was served with the British forces under Geoffrey Amherst and Sir James Wolfe. Ola Uday Iquiano, from 1745 to 1797. He gained his freedom and published his autobiography. And he talks about slavery, of course. He was a slave in Louisbourg with the British forces in 1758. The last thing slave owners wanted to do was to teach people how to read and write. The very last thing. Because slavery is based on race and skin color. So if you learn how to read and write, you're empowered. You really are. It's very powerful, isn't it? Learning how to read and write. I come from a working class background. I'm the oldest of 9. My dad had grade 7. My mother had grade 7. My dad's a World War II veteran. But we all got educated, every one of us. And people say, well, your parents must have encouraged you a lot. You must have had lots of books. Zane Grey would be the extent of the books. And my mom would say, you're upstairs working too hard. Come on down and play some cribbage. So I think it's just self-motivation. And you can see it among families yourselves. Some people are motivated to learn, others are not. And the big break for us in English was when the Sisters of St. Martha came there in 1954. There were 5 sisters. 4 of them had the equivalent of a Bachelor of Education. And one of those sisters had level 10 Royal Conservatory in piano, and another had level 10 in voice. So the status of education, at least in English, went from the floor to the ceiling. Okay? But that's just luck. That's all that is. Slaves in Louisbourg, and that's what I've done the most work on, represented only 3% of the population. In 1737, there were 50 slaves in the area. By 1752, there were 63. And in 1757, there were 125 slaves, roughly 3% of the population. Now, the Atlantic slave trade began with the coming of Christopher Columbus. He never did reach the North American mainland. He had 3 successive voyages, beginning in 1492. And this was the beginning of the slave trade. And until about 1870, there were 12 million Africans enslaved in the Western Hemisphere. And when I say Western Hemisphere, I mean North, Central, and South America. Now, this is where the enslaved people came from the west coast of Africa. Senegal, I'm going to take you there today. The great bulk of the enslaved people go to Brazil. There's 210 million people in Brazil today. The overwhelming majority of those people have slave origins. Very few slaves came to the United States. Only about 4 million, okay? A very tiny number of the 12 million, you know, a small number actually. This represents the trade from 1500 to 1870. So this is where the enslaved people are coming from. It was a tremendous period during the 18th century especially. But a return slave voyage from France, for instance, took 1 year to complete. They'd load up their ship, they'd get all the supplies, they'd get their crew, and they would sail down about for 3 months. It would take them to get off the Azores. So they're going down south, it's getting warmer all the time, lots of food to eat. And in the Azores, they would load up with water, would wait off the coast for about 3 months, and gradually they would go in and send emissaries in. African people would dicker with them, and they would pick up 1 or 2 slaves at a time. So after they were there for about 3 months, they got their full quota, and then they're going to begin their trip back home. Takes another 3 months to go to what is the West Indies here, and then another 3 months back. Next slide, please. I realize you can't see it so well, but the typical slave ship was pretty drastic. The ship was divided in 2. The women were kept on the afterdeck, and all the men were kept in chains down below. In chains, chained inside the ship. They were brought out once or twice a day, fed a bowl of rice or not too much food. And the women were all sexually exploited, every one of them. So in many ways, what I'm talking to you about today is a horrendous story, but it's a story that needs to be told. And when I started working on this in Louisbourg a long time ago, our staff at Louisbourg would not believe me. So I'm going to talk to you today about the French slave trade for a little while. 1715 to 1720, they were coming from Benin, Senegal, and Angola, okay? This is just the start of it. The French brought over 1 million people during the 18th century. 1721 to 2044 begins to grow even more. 1749 to 55, it really starts to take off. Next, please. Nantes became the most prosperous city in France, and it's on the Loire River. And I know there's many people of Acadian descent in this room. I'm Irish, some Scottish, and I have Acadian descent as well. The Acadians come from this region, Poitou and Anjou. Okay, right around here. So not too far from the Loire River. So this is where the slaves come from Angola up to Senegal. As I mentioned to you, the Europeans were scared to death to go into Africa. So they would seek to buy 1 or 2 slaves at a time. And they would have an emissary from the various African tribes. They would meet African kings and they would begin to buy slaves. So here are 2 Frenchmen here, and this is the king of Dahomey right here. And here's a person making supplications to the king. So these Frenchmen here are negotiating with the king.
Excuse me. So the king would offer up his people for money?
Yes. And don't forget, Africa, people are black, but they're not all the same. It's like in this room here. Everybody has different ethnic backgrounds. I'm Irish mostly. There's Acadians in this room, Scottish. You know, we come from different ethnic backgrounds, perhaps different religions. It's no different in Africa. In Nigeria, one of the largest countries in Africa, there's something like, 80 different tribes with all sorts of different languages. So just because people look the same doesn't mean they have the same background. So what happened in Africa is Africans enslaved other Africans. It had been going on for a long time. Then they bring them out to the coast and they sell them. This is Dahomey, king of Dahomey. That's present-day Benin. B-E-N-I-N. Africans enslaved Africans from other tribes and brought them out to the coast to be sold. So here you see this person who's in control. He's got a gun, right? That's power. And you see the neck brace around this enslaved person here being brought out. Remember Alex Haley's book, Roots? Kunta Kinte, do you remember that television show? Probably in the 70s. Anybody remember it? Yeah, we all remember it, don't we? Because it was pretty darn powerful. So they're brought out to the coast and they're held in confined spaces very similar to this. These are sketches from the 1790s, but it would have been very similar. The food is prepared next door. Okay? The most dangerous time was when the crew was off of Africa and the people were being brought out to the ship. Why? Because a lot of the people that were enslaved knew that they were never going to see their homeland again, their families. So a lot of people attempted suicide. And you know one thing about the white slavers? They're paying money for these people. They are paying money. So each one is worth money. So they don't want to have anybody commit suicide, die. That's not good. So this was the most dangerous time. And what they would do is, like, they're chained, but going out, they jump overboard any chance they get and commit suicide. Men and women were separated, but the whole point about slavery is degradation of the person, degrading. Women were all sexually exploited. Yeah, barriers constructed on the ship, women at the back, they would have their freedom, and the crew and the officers especially would pick their women and sexually exploit them. I've published a scholarly piece on female slaves as sexual victims. So this is where you really have to have your data together, right? There were 70 adult female slaves out of a total of 104 in Ile Royale. 35 of the 70 women gave birth to 46 illegitimate children. And we know this because of the baptismal records. The Catholic Church and the Anglican Church would ensure that slaves were baptized. They weren't quite sure that they were totally, fully human, but it just becomes a matter of counting, I think. And slaves were often not baptized until they're on their deathbed. And usually, people are baptized when they're born, shortly after they're born. 21 slave mothers in Louisbourg delivered 30 children. 15 slave mothers in Ile Royale outports delivered 16 babies. So there were some in Ingonish. The remaining 34 female slaves were either beyond their childbearing years, had died as a result of miscarriages, or were young children. So it takes 3 months to leave France, to go down to the Azores, another 3 months to get to Africa. After they load up, then they head to the West Indies. And what are the West Indies? Well, today, Guadeloupe, Marie-Galante, Dominica, Martinique, and I know you have a Martinique on Ile Madame, St. Lucia and St. Vincent, Grenada and Tobago. These are the West Indies. But the biggest slave colony, the biggest by far for the French, was the western half of Saint Domingo. You know what country that is today? Haiti, yes. And it's, it's a failed state, Haiti. But let me tell you just a bit about Haiti. In 1804, the Haitians, under Toussaint Louverture, gained their independence. There's a successful revolution. So France just walked away from it. They wiped their hands. And Haiti today is a total failed state. The United Nations wanted the Canadians to send in French-speaking troops in there, and the Canadians didn't want to have anything to do with it because you're going to be dying. There's a Haitian community in Montreal of about at least 30,000 people. And our former Governor General, remember her? Michaëlle Jean was from Haiti originally. But it's the French government. These are all departments. So if you go to anybody been to Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon? It's a department of the French National Assembly. So they get health care, all the services that we get, unemployment insurance, all those wonderful benefits that we get because they're a department of the French National Assembly. Same with these islands here. But Haiti, not so. So in my opinion, does the French government owe some responsibility to these people? I say yes, but that's just my opinion. Now, this is a slave ship, okay, showing how the people were laid out. The men, the women are kept in the after part. They're all chained down below on their backs. Chained by the ankles and by the wrists. The slave ships stacked their cargoes between decks. Each slave at a space about 5 feet by 2 was taken out once a day for exercise and fed twice. The reason that the French and all of the other enslavers are taking slaves to the West Indies, especially the French and the British, because these were the most valuable colonies in the world. And this is a typical plantation here, sugar plantation. This is where the owners would, overseers would live up here, and the slaves, you can't see them, but they would live in huts down here. And they would be working the sugarcane fields. Anybody ever see sugarcane, raw sugarcane for sale in Sobeys? It's like a stick, right? And you take it, and when you want to replant it, you just stick it in the ground. So from sugar cane, guess what you make? Rum. And you know who the biggest rum drinkers are in Canada by far? We are. Because it's part of our historical tradition. They didn't draw rye and vodka and all the rest in the rest of Canada. But we drink way more rum than the rest of Canada combined, even though Atlantic Canadians only represent about 2 million people at most. So they would get the sugar, they would harvest it, and eventually they're going to boil it. And one of the byproducts is molasses, which they run off, but they want the syrup. Yeah, so this is them processing the sugar cane here. There's a big fancy mill, but in the previous slide, they would just pound it, make it simple. Another product that they were growing in the West Indies was indigo. If anybody has blue jeans on today, that's the dye that's used in your blue jeans. Cotton, indigo, but sugar overwhelmed everything else. And the British, they quickly depleted their soil. But the French were going through the Enlightenment, a tremendous growth period for knowledge throughout the world. Just the orchestra came into being, the writing novels, agriculture, enormous growths. Almost every endeavor of human development took a large leap forward. It's so ironic that during this great leap forward and during the Enlightenment, slavery was going on that paid for much of it. There's a lot of irony in life, isn't there? Tons of it, right? We've experienced it in our own lives. But the Enlightenment is just a tremendous growth period. But the enslavers were making a fortune off the slave trade. So they're brought over and they're sold the way they're bought, 1 or 2 at a time. And most enslaved people would only live about 7 years. But the enslavers wanted to make sure that they were having children. The children of these slaves became enslaved. Now, of the 400 people that I've identified in Cape Breton, I've identified 14 who came directly from Africa. Okay? And the countries include Senegal, the Gambia, Benin, and the Congo, Democratic Republic of the Congo. I had the good fortune to spend quite a bit of time in Senegal. Anybody been to Senegal? It's a democratic country. It's French is one of the official languages. Wolof is the big language. And I was there for quite a long time. These are children. I'm going to talk to you today about Marie Marguerite Rose because she was one of the 400 people I've identified, but she became exceptional. She was exceptional because we have excellent data on her life. She couldn't read or write, but when she died, there was an inventory taken of her estate. She gets her freedom, and she marries a Mi'kmaq, Jean-Baptiste Laurent. And because of this, she became recognized, as a result of my work, as a person of national historic significance in Canada. Very big deal, at least for me. This is Missy Curtin-Chassé, who is from Whitney Pier, and she interprets the life of Marie Marguerite Rose. And this is where Marie Marguerite's tavern was. She rented a tavern. We know this because of the good evidence that was left. And this is an artistic representation of what her tavern looked like. She rented this side of the tavern right here, the west side, okay? So these 2 dormers and down here. That's her house down here. Slaves pretty well lived in all of the houses in Louisbourg, the great bulk of the houses. Pompey, born in the West Indies, lived in Lartigue House. He's baptized on 13th of March, 1732, and he died the same day. So he wasn't baptized until he was 13, right? You have a soul, but not quite a soul. You know, this is what the Catholics teach, right? You have a soul. This is Rosalie. She lived in the Carreau house. She looked after a lot of children there. Louise worked in the Seigneur house. Jean-Baptiste and Charles Joseph lived in the governor's quarters, and they were dressed in very fine livery. By the way, there were Acadians who owned slaves in Louisbourg. And when I brought this out, Acadian members of the staff said, "Impossible. Impossible. We were the people that were exploited. This is impossible." No, it's not impossible. It's possible, and with evidence, we know what the case was. So this is the plaque on Marie Marguerite Rose when you go to Louisbourg, and if you take the bus in, you'll go in, and this is what the plaque reads. Captured in Africa at the age of 19 and transported to Ile Royale, where she was sold to a member of the colonial elite. Marie Marguerite Rose is seen to be a key figure of the initial phase of black slavery in Canada. Gaining her freedom after spending 19 years in slavery, she married a Mi'kmaq man and opened a tavern in Louisbourg, becoming one of the colony's business community. Both were rare occurrences among emancipated slaves in New France. Rose's experience speaks to the presence of slavery on Ile Royale and in Canada, where an estimated, in Canada, present-day Quebec, 1,375 black slaves existed during the French regime. Many more indigenous people were enslaved in Quebec. So this is one of the plaques that you will see next to Marie Marguerite Rose recognition, and it shows some of the slides that I've showed you. People being brought out to the coast, a slave ship coming over and up to Louisbourg, and Missy Curtin representing them. So that represents slavery. And there's another plaque that represents Marie Marguerite Rose getting her freedom, okay? And this plaque describes all of that. So if you'd like to read more, I've published 8 scholarly articles on this, and this is where they're available, okay? So we'll just leave this slide up. If people, you don't need to copy anything down, you just Google Ken Donovan historian and this site will come up. And Marie Marguerite Rose is in the Dictionary of Canadian Biography. That was only published not too long ago, a little over a year ago. And anyway, it had the Dictionary of Canadian Biography has been around for, it's University of Toronto, Laval University. It's been around for a long time. But when this came out, it had the largest uptake in the history of Dictionary of Canadian Biography. So people are intensely interested. Okay?